Hey, John Gilroy here. A recent study shows that federal prem and private cloud is declining from 17% to 3% in the next 3 years. What are the implications for federal cloud security? Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. We have two guests today. We have Neil Carpenter. He's the field CTO. We also have Michael Hylton. He's the Senior Director for Federal Sales at Orca, O-R-C-A, Orca Security. Gentlemen, how are you?
And how are you today?
Well, Orca, we're not going to talk about PBS special about the oceans and oceanography and whales and mammals and everything else. Talk about cloud security. Now, I am an old guy, and I can remember sitting down with Vivek Kundra 15 years ago, and he pointed his fingers and he said, we got to move everything to the cloud. About 10 years later, people started saying, yeah, cloud first. And so I think these admonitions and pushes have succeeded. And so, Michael, the federal government's moving to the cloud, right? I mean, we can say, yes, it's happened.
Yeah, I think those horses have left the barn, and we can definitively say cloud first is pretty much everywhere in government. You see that in DoD and everywhere where you would probably think it's not there. It's happening faster and faster. We have to get in front of it. Yeah. So that's why I'm here today.
So, Neil, let's say we're sitting in a coffee shop in D.C., and I turn to you and go, yeah, the govies are moving to the cloud. So you put your feet up and have a cigar or something. I mean, it's an important transition, and there could be some implications that people don't realize.
I think it's an important transition, and there are a lot of security implications. I often find the security teams I work with, federal or otherwise, know security really well, but don't know the cloud very well. And that's where we are in a lot of cases. For me, the cloud is different from a security perspective, really first because it's ephemeral and it's self-service. So in other words, things can come up and go down all the time. And typically people can do that on their own, teams, developers, sort of whoever needs resources. So from a security perspective, I always think of the old world as if I needed a server, I had to go order one. It came into a mail room. Somebody unboxed it, slapped an asset label on it, put it on a cart, rolled it into there was all this lag, but there was also some predictability there where I had the ability to keep a good inventory starting in the mailroom. Yeah. It becomes very different in the cloud where things just disappear all the time.
So, Neil, we had my grown kids, stay here for a week last week, and there was an incident in the garage with the garage door. And let's say one person pointed the finger at another person, and the other person pointed the finger at a different person. There was a lot of dispute here as to who's responsible for this. And that's what I think is going on with the cloud is there a lot of assumptions that are made. An agency moves to the cloud, and they say, oh, old Neil will take care of it. Oh, old Michael will take care of it. But what's happening is that there's stuff falling through the gaps without assuming cloud-native applications.
It's definitely a shared responsibility. The way that I look at it, it's like the cloud service provider, they own the apartment, the complex, the building, the security for the perimeter, the actual hardware, the servers and things like that, and the perimeter, making sure people who belong there go there and don't cause problems. But everything inside your apartment, your furniture, maybe you have a security camera, all of that is your responsibility in this infrastructure that we're operating in today with cloud service providers. Still your data, still you're concerned about that leaks out. So there's that shared responsibility, and you can't turn that sort of blind eye about your security when it comes to that and think that, well, someone else has accountability and responsibility for that. It's a shared service together.
Yeah. Both have to do it.
And, Michael, I would say that shared responsibility model, all of the cloud service providers talk about that, right? It's very well defined. But to some extent, that moves also inside the organization. And what I mean by that is if I'm moving into the cloud, I probably have to embrace cloud native approaches. Otherwise, we're not going to get cost savings. We're going to cost significantly more in the cloud if we just pick up everything we have on-prem and drop it into one of the cloud service providers. So typically that move includes a refactoring to something like containers, microservices, these cloud native approaches. But the big difference there is that the constituents involved in fixing something are very different once you do that. And what I mean is if I have a vulnerability, let's say I've got a vulnerability in a web server. And it allows for remote code execution. Whether I'm running that on-prem in a couple of VMs or I'm running that in a cluster in the cloud in containers, the impact of that is pretty much the same. Somebody can exploit it, maintain persistence, do recon, move laterally, all the things we're worried about. What's different is how I fix it. So on-prem, a couple of VMs, maybe I file a ticket, somebody comes along at 3 a.m., patches those boxes, reboots them if they have to, closes the ticket, I'm in good shape. With containers, I can't patch run in containers. That's not the way it works. They're based off of a gold image. The way I have to fix this is I have to go back to the developer, whoever owns that container image, get them to fix it in the container image, rebuild it, retest it, reship it, and then redeploy those running containers. So even though it's the same problem, the way we have to approach fixing it becomes very different as we embrace cloud-native methodologies.
Yeah, and Michael, I think it's a moving target. I was thinking back when I was in high school, I worked at a retail store. We did an inventory with a piece of paper and a pencil, and we make slash marks and have it. But we knew what was there, what wasn't there. This is like doing an inventory with, you walk down the next aisle and the first aisle's changed. And then you go on the second aisle, and aisles are appropriate for data centers, and it's changed again. So Michael, rapid scalability, I mean, it must drive you crazy.
It does. And we hear about it from our customers all the time. How do you really understand what is out there in your cloud estate, which is multiple cloud security providers or multiple cloud providers? And how do you get visibility when you're not certain which machines are operating? Because they could be operating for 5 minutes or 5 seconds, 5 months, very different than the traditional on-premises where you have that ability to do once a year audit, if you will, and make sure that you're secure, because not a whole lot really changed back then. You had to order the server, as Neil mentioned, and set it up with a gold image. All this can happen dynamically based on demand and within seconds. So you have to have a tool that allows you to monitor in near real time rather than once a year. And in a cloud environment, using a legacy tool is sort of like akin to using a flip phone in today's age of smartphones. You're just going to get left behind and you're missing things you may not even be aware of. And I say that to my father-in-law. He finally went to a smartphone recently. I thought he was the last one holding out. He has this whole new world open up to him of possibility. It's the same thing with native cloud tools about the efficiency and the scale and the real-time essence of it.
Well, Neil, we talked about monitoring cloud tools. One differentiator for Orca is this concept of agentless. And so maybe you can thumbnail sketch of what agent versus agent-based is and how that really works.
Yeah. So, if you think about gathering security intel, that inventory and everything else that we want from the cloud, there's two big pieces of it. One, I'm gonna use the Gartner terms briefly. One is what Gartner calls CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Management. That's going out to the cloud provider and asking them what's there. What VMs have I created? What clusters have I created? What networks, et cetera? And you're calling their APIs, but essentially you're asking them what's there. And then the second is what Gartner calls CWPP, or Cloud Workload Protection Platform. And this is what's inside those workloads I've built. So I've got a couple of VMs. What vulnerabilities are in there? What's their configuration? What's going on with them? And this is, if you think back to Michael's example of the apartment building, my landlord or AWS owns the apartment, I own everything in it. This is right along those lines. We're asking the apartment owner what apartments exist. There's 1A, 2A, 1B, et cetera. And then we're going inside the apartment and cataloging everything that's inside of it. Now, early on in cloud security, all of the workload piece was done with agents. And we're familiar with these agents. We run them on laptops and desktops and servers on-prem. There are EDR or XDR or CWPP, all the Gartner acronyms for sort of workload protection. And so the thought was, we're just going to pick up on-prem what we're doing and move it to the cloud. And in the same way, every other approach sort of breaks when we do that. That broke. Because everything's ephemeral, because everything's coming up and going down, I don't necessarily have control over everything that's running. It becomes very difficult to deploy my agent on everything that's running this. And so what we see is for customers and organizations that are using an agent in the cloud for one reason or another, it's rare that we see more than 25% of their workloads covered. And, that's obviously what I don't see, I don't know. And that's not where we want to be. So from Orca's perspective, we started with the idea that there's got to be a better approach to this. And it's what we call side scanning. It's an agentless approach to that workload protection, to seeing what's inside the apartment, if you will. And the way it works is instead of having to deploy an agent on every workload, on every virtual machine, on every container, et cetera, we use the cloud itself to get snapshots, to get copies of those workloads and treat them like a forensic problem, pull them apart, see what's inside of them, what components are there, what's the bill of materials, how does that line up with known vulnerabilities, what's all of the stuff we're interested in. And so what we can do is go from that 25%, I'm struggling to deploy the agent on every workload, to I cover every workload automatically out of the gate. I can see every one of them because we can ask the cloud service provider, what are all the VMs? And then we can go through all of them and get snapshots. And then we can build on top of that, right? We do all sorts of work with that. One of the things that we've added to that is what we call sensor, which is really an agent, if you will, but it's a little different. But it lets us get runtime visibility on top of what we see in the snapshots. So now we've got an agentless first approach. We can cover 100% of what's out there, get all of our bill of materials, get all of our vulnerability data, get compliance, get all of everything we're interested in. Plus, for critical workloads, deploy the sensor and see what's happening in real time and runtime, and protect not just against misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, but look for those emerging threats, those indicators of a compromise.
So Michael, what an agentless approach means is you can do this goal of continuous monitoring. All of a sudden, you don't have to drop down, come back. It allows for continuous monitoring, which is everyone talks about.
Absolutely. And the thing that I love about it the most is you don't need to know your inventory of all your machines and assets. We'll do that part for you. So there's a chicken and egg, talking about chickens earlier, is really about where do you know where to put your sensors if you don't have a complete inventory of your cloud machines. And that's where we come in with the side scanning. It opens all that up completely for visibility. And then we have the ability to drill down and have your dashboard look just the way you need it to look. So if you're interested in known exploitable vulnerabilities, something that's being executed out there in the wild and taking advantage of machines, we'll alert you on that immediately. And that way you could focus on the most critical things that matter to you that day, whether it's compliance or vulnerabilities, configurations, something's exposing you to risk. We'll take care of that and alert you to it.
So Neil, in October, I drove to Columbus, Ohio. I interviewed a PhD at Ohio State, and the word compliance never came up before, after, during, lunch, anything, never came up. And here, Michael just used the phrase that plays, compliance. And so if we talk about federal systems, we have to talk about compliance. And so we talked initially about a transition from on-prem to the cloud. We see that happening. What are the unique challenges in compliance in that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges, a lot of them are the ones that we've already talked about, right? How do I monitor compliance if I have machines coming up and going down and disappearing and reappearing, and I don't know what my inventory is, right? So we help solve that to begin with. I think the second one, as I move into the cloud, as if on-prem wasn't bad enough, we have so many potential compliance standards that we have to adhere to. We have not only things like 853 that tell us how to configure a VM, but now we've got cloud-specific ones that look at how have I configured what I'm running in the cloud. We've got all of these layers of compliance frameworks to adhere to and to monitor. And I think for any organization, it's always interesting to see that journey towards maturity and compliance. I have a peer here who started out in compliance, and she describes doing this in spreadsheets. Every quarter having to show their compliance, and every quarter she got a spreadsheet that she had to go through line item by line item and provide screenshots and explanations of why they did or did not meet that particular benchmark within the standard. And, this was literally, she'd spend one quarter doing it. And then, like the Greek Sisyphus, the guy with the rolling stone up the hill, it would fall back to the bottom and she'd start again the next quarter. From an Orca perspective, we've automated that. So if it's 853 or it's whatever it is I need to comply with, we're doing all the work for you because we're already gathering all that data. We're doing it continuously. We will, out of the box, you say, here are the standards that are important to me, and we're going to immediately show you how you're doing, where you're failing, what assets you're failing on, what the specifics of why you're failing that particular benchmark are. And then going back to, you said continuous was a word we've used a few times now. This brings us to continuous compliance as well. In Orca, all of those benchmarks and all of those standards are tied to alerts. So if I think back to sort of the spreadsheet model of compliance, I would do this once for the quarter, report on it. Maybe I'd have a plan for, here are the things that I'm failing. We've got to get them right before the next quarter, whatever. But then I wouldn't check again for 3 months. With Orca, we're checking all the time. So I may be at 98% compliance on a particular standard and have a plan for the 2%. But if somebody manages to deploy something that causes a problem, that causes us to fall out of compliance, I'm going to know immediately and be able to say, oh, this thing's been deployed, it's out of compliance, let's go address it, instead of waiting for that next audit, that next run of the spreadsheet, if you will.
So, Michael, I'm taking you back to Columbus, Ohio. If I walked into a coffee shop in Columbus, Ohio, and I just talked to somebody and said, yeah, FedRAMP, they don't know what FedRAMP was. However, if you're in Connecticut Avenue, you walk into a coffee shop and casually say FedRAMP, it's like all the heads going to go up and go, that was like a 26-mile race pulling a log. And so you guys have pulled a log for several miles here, and now you can claim FedRAMP compliance, right?
That's absolutely right, John. It's a testament to our investment into the public sector. And I think the most important thing to note here is not a one and done type of accreditation. Something where we continuously have to demonstrate year over year that we're meeting the rigorous safety guardrails that the government puts in place. But I should also note, it's such a valid standard for cloud security platforms out there that the private industry is also adopting its use and saying, this is what we want to use as well. So we had to meet this stringent requirement, and it's something that we're dedicated to going forward. So all of our customers who are in federal, who operate in a moderate security domain can absolutely use this. And it's rather than going through an independent ATO to get an authority to operate, it's a process where they can streamline that by leveraging the GSA FedRAMP program.
And if I can interject there, because I think the thing I am most proud about is that we use Orca to supply everything for our own authority to operate. So, I think it's a quarterly reporting requirement, if I remember right, but we're using Orca to demonstrate that Orca, the platform, is complying with FedRAMP, which I think really speaks volumes about our ability to monitor and report on compliance and vulnerabilities and sort of all of the things that are required there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. We talked about agentless and giving you this flexibility for continuous. And then Michael used the word continuous. It's like, well, you're going to eat your own dog food on this, aren't you? And then Neil jumps in and goes, as a matter of fact, we had our own dog food for lunch. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're using your compliance mechanism to attest compliance.
Yeah. I call it drinking our own champagne. It's something where we have to monitor
food, huh?
all the time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we have that 24/7, and we're monitoring that in accordance to the FedRAMP. So absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, a little inside baseball, inside the Beltway talk. There are people in the Beltway, all kinds of acronyms. There's BOD 2301, M2131, blah, 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 all kinds of different requirements. Executive orders that talk about this, cybersecurity. And so, So how you guys can help yourselves? How can you help federal organizations achieve this compliance?
Yeah, maybe I could start on the BOD 2301. That's one I hear often, and that was issued by CISA in 2022, late 2022 there. And it's really focused on asset visibility and continuous vulnerability detection. So that's exactly what we do here at Orca. We provide that visibility across your entire cloud estate. You could be on multiple cloud providers. It doesn't matter. We can bring that together in one dashboard. But also, it's very difficult when you're in a cloud to track all that telemetry. There's an enormous amount of data that's generated, and we help you cut through that and monitor what is particularly necessary for you to be compliant, but also provide safeguards against data leaks, configuration issues, and to what Neil mentioned earlier, the idea of shifting left earlier in the development lifecycle to prevent vulnerabilities earlier on in your life cycle to reduce cost. And it's all about reducing costs and being compliant today in federal.
Yeah. So, Neil, when I think of asset availability and visibility, I think of people getting out a credit card and just firing something up. They call that shadow IT. In the commercial world, I think it's done pretty regularly. But in a environment that needs compliance, I mean, so what you're saying is that you can not only accomplish continuous monitoring, but continuous analysis of brand new assets or systems that are out there. I mean, shadow IT is the thing.
And apply policy to determine which ones are acceptable and which ones aren't. Absolutely. And yeah, I think, shadow IT, shadow cloud, shadow AI, shadow is now an adjective we're applying to everything. But we see a lot of this. And we see customers who use Orca to determine across all of their cloud estate what has been deployed through the approaches that they want, what's in the configurations that they want that meet their requirements and what isn't. And then automate, really tying together not just Orca as a platform that points out your problems and generates alerts, but tying that into the bigger infrastructure of how the organization is working. So whatever ticketing solution they're using, we have really best-in-class ticketing integration so that we can create the right ticket to get it in front of the right people with the right intelligence to tell them why it's a problem, what needs to be done. That to me is the important piece. It's not just that Orca does a great job at identifying cloud security problems, but we also integrate with the whole shop. We put the right intelligence in front of the right people wherever they're working so that everything that Orca is aware of is addressable and actionable.
Now, Michael, many times reporting is a time trap, and you spend 10% of your time working on a report where you could have been spending those 4 hours every week doing the work.
That's
all,
right.
all of a sudden, it's a 10% savings. And so does reporting fit into this whole description as well?
Absolutely. You want to have the ability to report on what matters to you. And it's one thing to say that you're secure, you're compliant, but it's another to prove it. And to have the ability to report, maintain a graph where you can essentially slice and dice the data to however it matters to you. And what's amazing, to Neil's point, is the reporting could be within the Orca platform, but the tools that your developers, your SOC team, incident response teams are using, a lot of times we have bidirectional enrichment of the data that goes back and forth, creating those tickets there, the alerts where they operate, and when they're addressed, syncs back up and alerts them that's been taken care of. So different dashboards for different people. It all comes down to timeliness and actionability. And we provide that. And we also give you what I love is the attack path identification. I think of this as the kill chain. Where do we need to address the multiple layers of security to prevent this from happening? Is it a vulnerability? Is it restrictions on permissions? And we provide that to you in real time using machine learning and AI. And it's just something where it saves a lot of time. So your point about reporting, that administrative overhead has to go down to the frictionless best way possible to operate securely and cost effectively.
So, Neil, remember in high school taking a math class and they'd say, that ain't good enough. We want to see your work. I think this is what you're doing. You say, here's the report, and we're showing you, here's our work.
Yeah, and the developers love it. It's like, tell me that it's vulnerable. Where? How do I fix it? And that's what we do. Yeah.
Good. So, Neil, Orca, ORCA.security. A lot of information there, so people can go at that website and get blogs and information about your recent FedRAMP success. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. Yeah, you'll find everything about the product there. You'll find we do a lot of research in cloud security. Our research team is amazing. One of the best things out of my day is interacting with that team and sort of we end up never having enough time to talk. We start talking about something and we're an hour in and we got to go. They do amazing work. You'll find all of that there. You'll find writing about features in Orca. You'll find us talking about more generally cloud security and what's going on in the space. There is a wealth of information at Orca.security. And if all of this intrigues you, you can request a demo and we'll get Michael's team on the phone with you and show you the whole platform and how it can help.
Yeah. And Michael, what they can do, they can go to, Orca.security and they can find out how, just the fact that you're FedRAMP authorized now, I mean, you can speed up delivery of this protection, can't you?
Absolutely. One of my favorite pages is our Trust Center. So on orca.security, you can go to our Trust Center. You can see the latest in all of our compliance that we support and that we have as a company. So operating security as well as the software development lifecycle. Where do we have our third-party audits? All that's up to date, and I encourage everyone to take a look at that. I will also mention I will be at Inlet May 5th in Denver. So if anyone in the audience would like to connect there, my team and myself will be there as well.
Good. And what I'll do in the show notes, I'll put a link to that Trust Center. And so if you're listening to this and you're trying to find out more information, you can go to federaltechpodcast.com and then search Orca, O-R-C-A, and then go right to that Trust Center because it's a pretty strong website. Well, great. I think we're running out of information here, unfortunately, gentlemen. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank our guests, Neil Carpenter, Field CTO, and Michael Hylton, Senior Director of Federal Sales at Orca Security, ORCA.security. Thank you.
Thank you, John.